In Countonia, a far-away land, there's a story that all children recite on command. Tall and slender, thin and frail, sweet and tender, I am pale. In the forest, where it roams, stench of death, the catacombs. To my surprise, he is eyes, 1, 3, 50 and more, covering its body and every pore. To the forest, a preserver, to Countonia, the observer. Chris Samuel, my higher-up, Captain Blackwell, called while I shined my sword with a loose cotton rag. I looked up to him. He was still in his night attire, and I softened my gaze. "Yes, Captain," I responded. "The king calls for your presence." Blackwell nodded to me and threw me my metal armor. My eyes widened as I heard this. The king wants me. I was fresh out of training and still barely had a taste of life, and I was already called upon the king of Countonia? I put on my armory hastily and followed my captain through the town. When we got to the castle doors, Blackwell looked to me one final time and put a hand on my shoulder. "Remember, you represent all of us. Do not fail us," he whispered as he kept his gaze low. I took a deep breath as I saw the huge doors opening, and I promptly put my head down. All eyes that met with the king's is considered rebellious. My captain and I walked to the throne room and kneeled upon feeling his presence. "Sir Chris," the king announced, "I have called upon you because you have advanced in your training with phenomenal feedback. I have been watching you, and I must say, I am impressed." He cleared his throat now, having his voice become a little deeper. "But there is one final test for you to accomplish. The killing of a beast." The room went silent. It seemed as if I was being left out of some knowledge. I didn't know we had to kill a creature to be with the big boys. Your Majesty." "Silence, Blackwell," the king demanded, and looked back to me. "You must have heard of the beast who watches, yes?" He arose from his throne. I looked up to him and nodded. "He's a threat to our kingdom. You shall make sure we don't see it again." The king then snapped his fingers, and in an instant, one of the men from the Elder Circle, a very classified group for the purist, walked to me and opened a box that was held tightly in his arms. My eye was struck with pure white light as I looked down at the beautifully detailed weapon. "Nobleman Sir Chris," the elder spoke to me. "We trust in you that you will save our people. We give to you the Sword of Shadows." He held his head down, as I then held up the blade, the light gleaming about the room, casting off the colorful castle walls. "I, King Sullivan, hereby name you Paladin Chris." And just like that, I was on my way. I walked into the entrance of No Light, the fitting name of the woods that surrounded Countonia, and was immediately swallowed by the darkness. I looked back to the entrance and saw Blackwell nodding to me. "Come back with its head," he chuckled, and I accepted that challenge. I'm representing my peers, people, and my kingdom. I will make them proud. As I ventured into the darkness, my blade lighted my way. I started to feel uneasy. It was too quiet. Not a noise from an animal, not a leaf falling to the ground. The only thing I heard was my own breathing. The sword cast down a beam of light to the crunchy leaves that I walked on. I aimed the light to the darkness I was walking into, and to my surprise, the darkness seemed to be consuming the light. It showed as if I was aiming the light into nothing, a void in which nothing exists. I feel myself becoming cold, and I pressed my weapon against my chest plate for warmth from the light. I continued along the unsettlingly straight path and stopped. Is that a light? I fixated onto a small, blue light in the darkness. I put my sword away to get a better look, and my eyes did not deceive me. It looked to be an opening into another part of the forest. I gripped the hilt and started to step towards the opening. When I got close to it, I saw how it wasn't just blue. It was pink, purple, hints of red, and the richest emerald green I have seen. I went to the entrance and climbed through the opening and glanced up to the many absurdly beautiful plants. They illuminated the woodlands with their many colors. Mushrooms with bioluminescent properties lit up the forest ground, exposing what seemed to be a large indent into the ground. I stared intently, and I crouched to the imprint. I let my gloved hand rub the dense soil. The beast too watches. I say to myself and look up. There, the beast stood. I froze as I see the creature watching me, staring. Fear paralyzed me. Hundreds of eyes dotted its face and slender body. There was no sign that it had a mouth, ears, or any other facial features. It was all eyes. Irritating holes in an unsettling pattern were places where objects were not, but they seemed to be forming an eye-like shape. It was extremely tall, standing at 20 feet from what appears to be. Its different colored optics all staring deeply. The beast seemed to be studying me. Ever so often it would catch sight of my hands shaking, but would always look back to where its vision rested. When life entered me again, I reached for my sword. The monster watched as I slid. Beast! I hesitated. The monster just stood still before turning its head to a nearby flowery tree and touched the tip of an unopened flower. Once he did this, the flower revealed its multicolored petals and picked it from the tree. I stood in awe as the beast then walked to me and bent down to hand me the flower. I slowly lowered my sword and hesitantly took the flower from the beast. I looked to the petals, then to the monster that stood before me. Is it really a monster? It doesn't act like the beast I've heard of stories about. All it does is watch, but never harms? I haven't been this confused before. Beast? I looked into the face of the creature and tried to unknowingly count how many eyes dotted his face, but failed to. The beast then stood upright again and closed its eyes, turning the other way, walking. I just stood there, dumbfounded. How was I supposed to react? I looked down at the flower and smelled its blueberry scent. It pushed a wave of nostalgia over me from when I was young. I then heard whispering and tilted my head. Was the flower talking? I held the flower to my ear. Nothing. I then looked to the sword that was in my other hand. Instead of its white light, it was pitch black. The void of space was encased inside of my sword. I held the sword against my ear and heard it talk. Kill, it whispered into my ear. I then was paralyzed again. The flower in my hand then started to wilt away into dust. The grass that surrounded me became gray and dull. The mushrooms stopped glowing and tilted abnormally. I then felt myself grab the sword with both hands, but it wasn't me. I wasn't controlling myself. What was happening? Beast! I seemingly screamed. The beast did not stop moving. I am here to take your life. I screamed once again and lost all movement in my body. My legs started to move. I was walking, jogging, then ended up sprinting towards the beast. My sword in my hand almost felt as if it was stuck to me at this point. I raised the black blade above my head and jumped towards the monster. It opened its eyes, and for a split second, I saw fear. I instantly slashed into it. Black blood and nerve endings spurted out of its wound. It collapsed as the sword started to suck the fibers out of the beast, causing the sword to seem to create eyes upon itself. I walked the beast's head and raised it to look at me, one final time. For Count Tonia, I whispered, and cut the beast's head clean off with one stroke. Its body then started to crumble, and with that, the forest went pitch black. All of the colors had disappeared. Still having no control, I walked through the pitch-black forest until I got out of the exit. I walked out of the forest and was surrounded by guardsmen, Blackwell, and the king. Look what you have done. Blackwell smiled at me. I looked to my hand and saw the beast's head in my hands. I dropped it quickly and looked back to Blackwell, but he shook his head. and looked behind me. I turned around and my eyes went wide. The whole forest was gray. The green had faded from the trees. The grass was all crunchy. Paladin Chris, on behalf of my people and the greater good for our agricultural growth, I sentence you. The king gave a small grin. To death. I fell to my knees as the guardsmen took me in their arms and dragged me. My blood was boiling. You, I growled. You used me, tricked me. I tried to lunge at him, but failed. The King and Blackwell just exchanged amused glances and looked back to me. With a pat on the head from the king to me, he chuckled once more. Thank you for making me look good, Chris. I will help my kingdom out of poverty now. I will be remembered because of you. I tried to bite at him, but he quickly took my jaw into his hand. It is really a shame no one will remember you. He chuckled and walked away with Blackwell. I was being dragged to the guillotine, and with one last breath, I called out, You were the real monster.